Have faith. Before they proved me wrong, I believed it was something you offered freely and something that people deserved. Innocent, unless proven guilty, you know. It was a reassuring perspective on the world. I was often accused by my aunt of being overly trusting and of giving too much of myself to people who didn't deserve it. She was correct. Because I now understand that trust is only a leverage game. Yes, you can trust others, but only if you trust them to act in their own best interests. It's not pessimistic. It's just the way things are. You can forecast someone's behavior if you know what motivates them. The story is in your hands. Burns are preventable. That lesson came to me the hard way. Luke is my name. If my mother was upset with me, Lucas, and at the moment, I'm just existing in the furthest spot I could possibly go. Northern Australia's Darwin. Although it's not precisely a paradise, it was useful as a place to vanish. I didn't have any plans for the future when I got on that airplane with just a backpack and $500 in my pocket. How to quit feeling everything was on my mind. I'm still here after 3 years. I'm still working it out. And she was the first of all. I had everything I ever imagined wanting 3 years ago. Melbourne life. A fiancé. A future. Ella was her name. She had the natural ability to make a space seem brighter. Sharp as hell. 5'3", with legs that looked stunning in a pencil skirt. On a gloomy, rainy morning, we met in the most unlikely way possible, a crowded tram. The driver was me. She was the drenched commuter whom eager businessmen pushed aside. Perhaps it was sympathy. It might have been something else. However, for some reason, I ended up offering her the extra seat in my cabin, breaking every rule I had ever known. She paused, looking at me as if I were either a jerk or her lucky charm for the day. I gave the seat a nod. She entered. That was the beginning. A small gesture of generosity that developed into something I never anticipated. After then, we couldn't be separated. Meals, walks at night, and snatch time in between job shifts. Despite the objections of her family, she moved in 6 months later. They were classic and old-fashioned. I never really got to know the others, though Sophie, her younger sister, came to visit us a couple of times. Ella was younger than me at 26, but it made no difference. She gave us the impression that things were progressing and that we were creating something. And I believed I was solidifying that future when I proposed. I ought to have seen the warning flags. The first was her hesitation before accepting. I recall my mother's reaction when I showed her the ring. Not the thrill I was hoping for. Not arrogance. Simply put, melancholy. And then there was the way Ella began to retreat. She informed me that she hadn't anticipated my seriousness about us and that she wanted time to think things out. I gave her space even though it hurt. Because when you love someone, you do that, don't you? The weekend trip followed. She informed me that my mother had asked her to join her for a girls' weekend that would only include the two of them. That was odd. My mom had never brought it up. I didn't question it, though. I wished to trust her. She appeared aloof when I dropped her off at the airport, deep in contemplation. I thought she was simply anxious about being by herself with my mother. She had changed by the time she returned. Less noisy, more sentimental. When she thought I wasn't looking, she would watch me with eyes as wet as if she were trying to contain her tears. She clung to me that night as if she was worried I would vanish. I ought to have inquired. I ought to have pushed. However, I didn't. And my biggest error was that. The next shocking revelation came on a Thursday evening. My parents called me on the phone. They were spending the weekend in Melbourne. Adam, my brother, was also coming. I assumed it was for a football match because I hadn't seen him in months. I informed Ella. She hardly responded. I picked them up from the airport on Saturday morning. Everyone appeared. Strange. Too courteous. Too compelled. Normally the first to joke, Adam was unnaturally silent. My parents continued to look at each other as if they were anticipating an event. I ought to have observed how they gazed at Ella's vacant seat next to me. They had lunch at a charming little bar close to their accommodation. I gave Ella a call and instructed her to meet us there. She was sitting on the side of the bed and gazing out the window when I arrived home. By the door was her suitcase. My heart fell. When I entered the room, she turned, and I noticed it for the first time. Fear, not remorse, not melancholy. Fear. I moved forward and grabbed for her. She winced. It was as if she had forgotten who I was. I realized then, I was aware that everything was going to collapse, but I wasn't sure what it was. The drive to the pub is not anything I recall. I can't recall parking. I don't recall exiting the vehicle. I do recall seeing them for the first time. On one side of the table sat my parents. On the other side was Adam. My Ella, in particular, was slipping into the seat next to him, not beside me, beside him. She then extended her hand to take his, clutched it like if he were the only thing keeping her afloat and she were drowning. It was as if someone had taken my breath away. My mother's face was pale as she gazed at me. I wasn't listening when my father cleared his throat to speak, since I was observing Adam, and I will always remember the way he gazed at me, remorseful, guilty, yet somehow defiant, as if he had merited it, as if he was entitled. Then he turned to Ella before I could even comprehend it, and gave her a kiss, not on the cheek, a peck that's not friendly, a kiss on the mouth. My gut churned. The world swayed. Suddenly, all I had trusted and everything I had built was gone. I glanced at my parents. My mom refused to look at me. They were aware. They were aware from the beginning. They allowed me to enter this nightmare without warning, and they still set me at this table. My father then started talking. Luke, we need to respect their wishes. Give them space. Space. That word rang like a death sentence inside my skull. Space. To spend time together. To take me out of the photo. I got to my feet. Too quickly. My vision swirled as the blood drained from my brain. My wrist was squeezed by my mother's hand. Luke, please. I pulled away. I had to relocate. I had to take a breath. I therefore took the only action I could. I took off running. I left that eatery in a hurry, leave that life behind, and I arrived at the airport 40 minutes later. I was trying to find the most distant one-way ticket I could purchase, Darwin, 4 hours away. Excellent. So I wasn't merely fleeing from them, I was fleeing from myself. Running has the drawback that you eventually stop. You don't want to, not because you've achieved tranquility. However, your body simply gives out. You're left with nothing but stillness and the chaos in your own mind after that. Darwin was ideal for vanishing. People go to this hot, remote location when they don't want to be discovered. After checking into a rundown motel with a rock-hard bed that first night, I lay down and spent hours staring at the ceiling fan. I took a drink after that. I had a drink that I wanted to forget for the first time in my life. It became a routine. Bourbon became breakfast, mornings became evenings, and I stopped looking at the calendar. Here, time did not exist. I got a job somewhere in the process. Just work at a quicklime plant, nothing extraordinary. Dirty job. Work hard. The type that didn't need a lot of thought, which was ideal because I didn't want to remember anything that came from thinking. I crawled inside crushers all day, my hands shaking from the bottle last night, my skin scorching from the chemical dust. As long as I came there, the foreman didn't care. And since I had nothing better to do, I did it day after day. Nobody else. Ella had left. She was accompanied by my own brother, Adam. What about my family? They were aware. After observing my world burn, they sat across from me and gave me a courteous little phrase. Give them space. Space. What was the amount they required? Another city? Another state? A completely different life? All right. They have my whole attention, but I could still hear her at night. Not in a spooky, spectral sense. It's more like echoes. A laugh that sounded just like hers. We used to dance to this song on the radio. My stomach dropped before I realized it wasn't her, a woman in line at the grocery store wearing the same scent. She wasn't present. She would never come here. But I couldn't help but stare. Wishing? No. Simply waiting? I had no idea for what. Until I did hear her one night. Or perhaps I just made it up. When I swore, I heard my name as I was lying on my bed, somewhere between drunk lucid and just plain inebriated. Soft, hesitant, yet not demanding or loud. When she wasn't sure about something, she used to state it like this. I shot to my feet. Quiet. I sat there looking at the door for a long time, half expecting it to open. It didn't. Naturally, it didn't. Because the living world is not a place for ghosts. If it weren't for the police, I might have continued to work, drink, sleep, and repeat indefinitely. On a Thursday, it took place. I can recall because I felt it when crawling into Crusher 3 halfway through my shift. The strange tingling feeling at the nape of my neck, like if I were being watched. I choose to disregard it until tiny stones began to bounce off my helmet. I let out a sigh. What? No answer. After removing myself from the crusher and cleaning my face of dust, I looked up to see my foreman standing on the platform, crossed arms, angry. Not in a positive way either. The kind that says, "You're going to have a problem." He jerked his thumb in the direction of the office without saying anything. I spotted the police cruiser at that point. In an instant, my gut became icy. I wasn't handcuffed by the officers. They weren't hostile at all. After looking at me and opening a folder, one of them, a man in his 40s with a sun-weathered face, asked, "Lucas McAllister?" I gave a nod. He glanced at the folder again. "Born September 17th, 1985? One more nod. "You know there's been a missing persons report filed for you?" he asked after glancing at his partner. I blinked. Someone missing? It nearly made me chuckle. Who cared enough to search for me now after 3 years? Why? The voice I believed. I heard then came back to me. I clenched my hands. My stomach rumbled. That report had been filed by someone I knew exactly. Ella. I assured the police that I was all right. They took notes, nodded a lot, and asked a few typical questions. And then one of them grinned and remarked, "Good to get a positive outcome for once." I'm not sure why, but that really annoyed me. A good result? As if I were a fugitive child in need of a conversation? I simply entered the office, took my last paycheck, and resigned without saying a word. Forgot to load my locker. Simply left with my bottle of bourbon, which was all that was important. I just had one thought by the time I returned to my room. I had to go. Once more. I had no idea where I was heading. Didn't give a damn. Mines were found in Queensland. There were oil rigs in Western Australia. Hell, I might board a boat to Bali and end up on a beach as a nobody. I noticed it halfway down the street. The car was rented, directly in front of my lodging. I paused. My heart raced. I gasped. Then I caught sight of them, my folks, my sibling. Ella, too. Someone was in her hand. A newborn. My legs became immobile. My mouth became parched. Ella turned as if she could sense me. Her gaze locked with mine. Adam turned as she murmured something to him. I wasn't waiting to find out what would happen next. I spun around and took off running. I sat in the McDonald's parking lot for hours, my head whirling and my hands shaking. A newborn. I had always used protection with Ella. Always. Which implied I wasn't a dad. I was an uncle. That hurt much more somehow. They were no longer there. Lived a life. A kid. A future. Nevertheless, they arrived here. Why? Why now? I was certain that I didn't want to see them. However, I noticed them when I returned to my accommodation to collect my belongings. Inside the shared kitchen, my mom is in the kitchen, my dad is speaking. Ella is feeding the infant while seated at the table. Adam was standing next to her. A young girl is on the floor playing with a doll. I went cold. Something broke inside of me. I can't even recall clenching my fist. All I can recall is the stinging pain that shot up my arm when the shoddy plaster gave way beneath my knuckles. Then there was stillness. Everybody turned to face me. Then her voice quietly. "Luke?" A murmur, an appeal. I was unable to resist. I pivoted. She stood in the doorway, staring at me as if I were a ghost. Because I was one in her universe. And that's when I understood I wasn't alone in being troubled by the past. I was struck in the ribs by her voice. "Luke?" She seemed tentative and soft, as if she wasn't sure I was genuine. I went cold. Despite my heart hammering in my ears, I remained motionless, couldn't. Small and frail in a way she never was, Ella stood in the common kitchen doorway. She had changed appearance. Thinner, older. She appeared to have not been sleeping because of the black circles under her eyes. I detested her at the time. She still had the ability to make my stomach turn, and I detested that. I detested the way she gazed at me as though I were the ghost, as if I were the one who vanished. She stepped forward, her gaze darting to my face and then back to my bloodied knuckles. "Can we talk?" I chuckled. Not the humorous sort, the broken, bitter sort. "Speak? After all these years?" My palm smeared blood on white plaster dust as I wiped it on my jeans. What's there to talk about, Ella? Adam came into view behind her. My sibling. He didn't say anything, yet he had the audacity to appear guilty. It was all right. In any case, I had nothing to say to him. Looking back at the infant in the high chair, Ella bit her lip. I need to explain, describe. As if this could be fixed by some magical word combination. It was as if there was a sentence that would excuse her leaving me for him. I tightened my jaw. I spoke quietly. You didn't need to come all the way up here for that. She gave a slight flinch, but I could see it. I turned to go. Please, she said in a whisper. I was stopped by that word, not due to her, due to me, because I had dreamed of this moment for years. On my worst, most inebriated nights, I dreamed about it. I also told her to go to hell in each version. I left without turning around. But as I stood here, I became aware of something. I had no desire to run. Not now. I crossed my arms and turned around. You have 5 minutes. We took a seat outside. I refused to be in the same room as my family, not because I wanted to. With her fists clutched together and her knuckles white, Ella sat on the edge of a wooden bench. At first, she didn't look at me, simply gazed at the ground as if it had the answers. After you left, she began in a hushed voice. I tried calling, texting, but your number was disconnected. Your parents wouldn't tell me anything. I remained silent. She took a swallow. For months, She shook her head and let out a quick exhale. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we didn't come here to hurt you. Sharp and without humor, I laughed once more. Didn't you? She seemed to be preparing for a blow as her shoulders hunched downward. I questioned, why now? I gestured toward the rented car and the infant, asking, why this? Why the search report? You've had 3 years to reach out. Ella's fingers clenched in her lap as she hesitated. She then said, because I need you to know the truth. I felt sick to my stomach from something in her voice. I moved around in my chair. The truth about what? She let out a breath and, for the first time, looked up at me. She had a dark, raw look in her eyes. Something tangible. She swallowed. That night at the restaurant, it wasn't how it looked. I sneered. You're kidding, right? I was pregnant, Luke. My entire body stiffened. But the baby wasn't Adam's. My entire being became still lifeless. I was waiting for the joke as I looked at her. I'm waiting for her to exclaim gotcha with a grin. For this reason? This was illogical. She was telling lies. She must have been telling lies. When she saw my face, she hurried on, her voice now trembling. She stopped talking and pressed her palms to her temples. I didn't know, okay? I didn't, she continued. When I went to see your mom that weekend, I was already late. I thought it was just stress from the engagement. But then I took a test and she paused and shut her eyes. I freaked out. Even though I was still stopped and analyzing, my mouth moved by itself. You freaked out? So you left me? Her eyes filled with tears. No. Your mom convinced me to leave. The world swayed. I clenched my hands. What? She nodded rapidly, her words suddenly leaking out, raw and frantic. I told her about the baby. She told me that you wouldn't be ready, that I'd ruin your life, that I should think about what was best for everyone. Now my breath came sharply and quickly. So, she convinced you to sleep with my brother instead? Ella's expression contorted. No. God, no, Luke. I never slept with Adam before that night. That's why I kept saying yes felt wrong. I was confused. I didn't. She stopped and exhaled. Your mom convinced me to break up with you before you found out. She said you'd resent me, that you'd feel trapped, that it would be better if. She walked away. For her, I completed the phrase. Better if you broke my heart before I found out about the baby. She gave a nod. First came the nausea, then the anger. I wished for my pulse to slow as I squeezed the heels of my hands into my eyes. Mom, my own mom. She had deceived me, played us. With silent apathy, she had started it all and watched it fall apart. And when did everything fall apart? Daring enough, she told me to give them space. The bile rose in my throat, and I choked it down. And Adam? When did he come into this? Ella winced. After you left, I shook my head and let out a deep exhale. Naturally. Adam was there to pick up the pieces after I ran. I said, So, in a hollow voice, what happened to the baby? Quiet. Then, just above a murmur, I lost her. The world fell silent. My ears are ringing. The borders of my vision became blurry. Her voice was shaking now as she said, I was 6 months along. She wiped her cheeks and shook her head. The doctor said it was stress. Too much strain on my body. She muttered, I lost her, Luke, and I lost you, and I didn't know how to get you back. I looked away, swallowed forcefully. I ought to have sensed something. Fury. Pain. But I just felt worn out. Why now? I repeated. Ella took a whiff, gathering her thoughts. She paused and turned back to the rental car before saying, because I needed you to know the truth. And because my son should know his uncle, that struck a new chord. I turned to face the child dozing in the car seat. A boy. The son of Adam. My nephew. And I didn't know what to do for the first time in years. Like the thick air before a storm, her words lingered between us. Because my son should know his uncle, I was unable to look at her. I was also unable to look at the child in the automobile. Too many feelings were raging through my body at once, including betrayal, despair, and wrath. I never met this daughter. A mother who had planned my demise. A brother who had replaced me. And now this. Ella's fingers twisted together as she shifted on the bench. Speak up, she muttered. What on earth was I meant to say? I swallowed forcefully while looking at the floor. Then I said, and Adam? What does he think about this little reunion? She paused. He's unaware that I came to look for you. I looked at her because of that. He's not sure? My voice sounded harsher than I had intended. You brought your child, traveled a great distance, and unearthed the past, and you didn't even tell him? She winced, but she kept her eyes fixed on him. Luke, I had to do this. For me, for you. She let out a trembling breath. For her, she lost the baby. My daughter. I pushed back the anguish that was about to overwhelm me as I closed my eyes. I had buried that aspect of my life for years. I spent years persuading myself that Ella hadn't truly loved me. It seemed like the simplest thing in the world for her to pick Adam over me. And now, in my hands, everything I believed to be true was becoming dust. I opened my eyes and fixed her with a stern look. What do you expect me to do? Return to your life? Become a decent uncle? Play happy family? Ella took a swallow. No, I have no expectations. I simply wanted you to be aware of the truth. I ran a hand through my hair and exhaled sharply. And how do you want me to handle that? She didn't respond, so she was also unaware. I got up because I had to move and breathe. The weight of everything crushing down on my chest made the air feel too heavy. With the same expression on her face as she had in the restaurant that evening, Ella remained on the bench and watched me. I had been tormented by that one for years. I'm sorry, shame, decrease. However, nothing changed as a result. The life I lost was not restored by it, didn't bring my lost daughter back. Before my intellect could stop my feet from moving, I moved toward the road. Behind me, Ella said softly. Where are you going? I mumbled. Anywhere but here. Luke, please, however, I had already started to go. All I knew was that I had to move, but I had no idea where I was heading. I had to leave the storm that was brewing inside of me before it erupted. I found myself in a booze store. That should come as no surprise. Old habits don't go away easily. As I entered, the cool air hit me like a slap, and the bell jingled. The shelves were lined with rows of amber and transparent glass bottles that offered escape. I wanted it with itchy hands, the numbing haze, the familiar burn. Without thinking, I reached for a bottle of bourbon, proceeded to the registration. I crossed the counter with my card. Then I paused. I clenched my fingers around the bottle. Drinking has been my escape and crutch for 3 years. Every time the agony returned or the memories were too loud, I drank whiskey to shut it out. But as I stood there, I became aware of something. Alcohol would not be able to remove this. I was unable to drink myself out of this. My grip relaxed. I replaced the bottle, and I left with nothing for the first time in a long time. The rented automobile was gone by the time I returned to my motel. No, Ella, no, sweetie. Nothing but quiet. Something weighed heavily on my chest as I gazed at the vacant parking space. It ought to have been a sense of relief, as if I had escaped another bullet. However, it didn't. It was simply a sense of loss, once more. I entered the room, collapsed on the bed, and gazed up at the ceiling. Where I had struck the wall earlier, my knuckles ached, but the agony seemed far away, as if it weren't mine at all. It was amusing, the past. It always found a way back, regardless of how far you ran or how deeply you buried it. It was looking directly at me now. I'm not sure how long I lay there, but at some point I heard someone knock on the door. Not too loud. It's not urgent. There, just there. At first I didn't move. I didn't believe I could. Then it happened once more. 3 gentle taps. With a groan, I got up and opened the door. There stood Ella. By themselves. She hesitated as she glanced up at me. "May I enter?" I looked at her for a while. Finally, I moved to the side. Slowly, as if she thought I would change my mind, she entered, leaning against the door with my arms folded. I closed it behind her. "You've returned." Ella didn't sit down, simply stood there with her hands clasped together and her eyes darting about as if she was unsure of where to begin. At last, she decided to tell the truth. I needed to give it another go. I let out a breath through my nose. "What exactly are you trying?" She took a swallow. "To put things right." I laughed sharply and without humor. "This cannot be made right, Ella." She took a moment to gather herself before her face crumbled. "I understand. However, I had to come anyhow." Between us, there was a heavy silence that was filled with things neither of us wanted to speak. Then she murmured softly, "You didn't ask about her." I tensed up. I didn't need to inquire. I had been trying to avoid asking, because it would be real if you knew, and I would have to bear that burden for the rest of my life if it were true. However, Ella would no longer allow me to flee from it. I had to force myself to say it. What was her name? As though she had been waiting for years to utter it aloud, she took a trembling breath. Lily. Lily. My breath was taken out of my lungs by the name, which was like a gut punch. She was named. She had been there. I swallowed the pain in my throat and closed my eyes. "Explain her to me." Ella spoke in a quiet, almost respectful tone. "She had your nose." She smiled sadly as she said, "I saw it in the ultrasound, as well as your hands. Long fingers." I used to joke that she would either steal my wallet or play the piano. I let out a breath that was halfway between a sob and a giggle. She was never able to see me. I never got to hold her. I had no idea that she was, and yet I fell in love with her in an instant. With a voice hardly audible above a whisper, I said, "I should have been there." Eyes were cleaned by Ella. "No, Luke. I ought to have allowed you to be there." I tightly tightened my mouth and blinked. Nothing else could be said. What was done was done. We were also unable to return. Like she was letting go of something, Ella exhaled. She remarked, "I came here to ask for nothing, not pardoning, not a friendship. Simply put, I didn't want you to go your entire life thinking that I abandoned you because I didn't love you." My chest hurt. "Did you?" I inquired. "Did you adore me?" She gave a sorrowful smile. I didn't stop. A searing, acrid ache pierced my body. It meant nothing, but it was the truth. Since love was insufficient, never had it been sufficient. I gently nodded once. "All right." Ella looked at my face as if she had more to say, as if she was anticipating something. However, there was nothing more to offer. A long minute later, she took a step back toward the door. "Look after yourself, Luke." For her, I opened the door. After hesitating, she left without turning around. The following morning, I prepared my luggage. It wasn't because I was sprinting. Not now. But because I had to get back to living. Darwin had not been a home but a place to hide. If there was one thing I was certain of, it was that it was time to cease existing as a ghost. I went outdoors, left the key on the counter, and headed for the horizon, putting one foot before the other. A fresh start. For me, for Lily, for whatever followed,